I've always believed that miracles can happen. You just have to be in the right place at the right time. But they occur most often, perhaps, in the imagination of a child. You see, imagination reflects heavenly truth. It took me a long time to realize that fact. There's no escaping it. I suppose that should come as no surprise. I mean, we are God's creatures, after all. And the way we know that is from the things we create ourselves through our imaginations, however imperfect that may be. As a child, my own creations were certainly luxuriant. The things my imagination came up with. A whole world up in that little end room, high up in my parents' house near Belfast. Here, with my brother Warnie, I created my first stories. Talking animals, knights in armor, fearsome giants. People have often asked me, where did the Narnia stories, like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, come from? Maybe they began there, in that imaginary world we created. Anything could happen there. A frog could become a king, a mouse, a hero. Everything was possible. Perfect world, I suppose. One day, my brother Warren made a toy garden on a biscuit tin lid. And all of a sudden, I don't know where, I had a sensation that would come back through all the years of my youth. A sensation of incomparable bliss, of loss and longing all at once. The desire beyond words, then gone before I knew what I desired. For want of a better word, I called it joy. How I longed to recapture that feeling.
For C.S. Lewis, childhood was a very happy time. It was happy for all kinds of reasons. He had an idyllic childhood. Just outside of Belfast, he had a brother who he loved and got on with really closely. He had a nurse who was a wonderful storyteller who bred in him a fascination with myth and legend. He had an eccentric dad who was a wonderful, amazing character. He had a very loving mother. And he lived in a house full of books. What better place for a child who was destined to grow up to be a writer than to live in a house that was absolutely stacked to the rafters with books?
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Lewis's mother, Flora, had to be an extraordinary woman, a 19th century Irish woman, the daughter and granddaughter of clergy people, with a degree in mathematics, of all things. So she was a logician and a mathematician, which is ironic given that Lewis, virtually till he died, could not balance his checkbook.
But Tom was very happy in the water.
She taught him some Latin, taught him some French before anything else. Lewis was exceedingly articulate and literate very, very early on. And so he was devoted to his mother.
Long time to come.
It was, above all, safe, mother and father and his older brother. But it was also very free. Now, this combination of freedom and safety is a wonderful thing. And that's what he had there, especially with his mother and his brother.
And what did he live on? That's enough for now.
But Mama...
No.
For Lewis, his mother was everything. She was certainty, she was assuredness. She was, he said, like a continent. She was like the rock on which his life was established. And then, overnight, she sank.
There came a time when our whole existence changed into something alien and menacing. One night, I was ill. I was crying. I had a headache. I wanted my mother. She didn't come. I remember doctors in her room and voices and comings and goings all over the house. It seemed to last for hours. Later that night, my father came and tried to tell me things I could barely conceive. My mother was ill too, he said, very ill. In short, it was cancer.
God bless Warnie, Papa too. God bless Mama.
Next day, I set myself to produce, by sheer willpower, the belief that my prayers would bring about her recovery. When nevertheless she died, I worked myself into the belief that there was to be a miracle. Why not? After all, the Bible said it had been done at least once before. Why couldn't God do it again? Wasn't he the great magician? The magic didn't work.
I think when people die, people can react in different ways, and one way is to retreat within yourself. And C.S. Lewis's father did exactly that. He withdrew. He withdrew from Jack and from his brother Warnie.
Happy? Jax. Leave him be.
Not because he didn't love the boys, not because he didn't care about them, but because his own grief for the loss of his wife was so great.
Want to see what I found under the big elm tree?
My brother and I came to rely more and more on each other. Had he but known it, our father was losing his sons as well as his wife. My father dispatched us both to boarding school in England. First my brother, then me. All settled happiness disappeared from my life. My family was gone. I felt even God had abandoned me. I was alone in the world. Look at that. We're having a cold snap. An early snow, if I'm not mistaken. I've always had a liking for snow, but not necessarily for the shivering that comes with it. Do you remember the state of Narnia, under the White Witch? Always winter, but never Christmas. Rather like my old school.
Now back to your corner, boy.
The only stimulating part of the teaching was the headmaster's well-used cane.
Right, on the board in front of you, you will see 6 basic...
The effect of school on Lewis, I think, was to reaffirm the existence of cruelty. The casual cruelty, the bullying, the requirement for submission, the absence of any option to escape.
Mind you, it was honest bullying. Torment executed in the most disinterested fashion. Art for art's sake, you might say.
Look what he's got!
A little bit of loot on the side.
Boarding school was the anti-family.
That's for the dolly!
If you had to invent some horror that would undo what the good family does, it would have been the boarding schools that Lewis went to.
Now that I come to think of it, a vile boarding school is perhaps an excellent preparation for the Christian life. It teaches you to live in hope. Thanks to my schooling, the impression I got was that religion in general was utterly false. I wanted nothing to do with it. I maintained that God did not exist. Yet, I was also very angry with God for not existing. As you see, I was at this time living, like so many atheists, in a whirl of contradictions. I was desperate to escape formal education. After much pleading, my father agreed that I should move on, and not a moment too soon. Any longer in that educational purgatory, and goodness knows where I should have ended up. Certainly not in Narnia. But in the nick of time, I found refuge, and in the most unusual form. It took the tall and somewhat unsettling shape of William T. Kirkpatrick, a retired headmaster who'd once tutored my father. He was also known as the Great Knock. As my train pulled into that country station, I had no idea what to expect.
Lewis Kirkpatrick, known as Knock.
Ah, good to meet you.
If you think of C.S. Lewis arriving at the home of this man, a man who is wise in language, in literature, who takes this boy and says, you don't understand anything. I'm going to tell you everything that there is to know, and it's up to you whether you want to believe it or accept it. That's your choice. You know, C.S. Lewis called it red beef and strong beer that he got when he visited W.T. Kirkpatrick, and at the end of his first week there was writing home to say that this was going to be the most amazing time of all his life, and it was.
Socrates makes an error of logic when he concludes that if you mistake your enemy for your friend, it is right to help your enemy.
But that doesn't invalidate his main point.
Prove it.
He challenged everything that Lewis said, the most innocuous comment about nothing, which over the course of the year just clobbered Lewis into the most rigorous intellectual agility and muscularity. And he paid his debt often to the Great Knock. The Great Knock is the one who taught me how to argue.
In that case, we should refer again to the text.
Moreover, to my delight, he was an atheist. The world was entirely free from the Christian God. Imagine your own feelings if on waking up one morning, income tax had completely vanished from the whole world. I was in total bliss.
The Great Knock apparently was an empiricist, give me what I can see. And of course, lots of evidence for religious faith, by design, cannot be seen. The Great Knock, Kirkpatrick, was impressed with Lewis, called him probably the most gifted classical student he had ever tutored, which would turn out to be true when Lewis applied to Oxford. I think from this point on he aimed at two things, being a poet and probably being an Oxford Don.
I had arrived. I was at Oxford University, the topmost pinnacle of learning and scholarship. My future no longer loomed, it beckoned. Oxford was exhilarating, but I arrived just in time to become a soldier.
What are you doing that?
In the hell they called the Great War.
It coarsened him. It hardened him. He saw blood and gore around him. I think it reaffirmed his atheism in his own mind. Lewis said, as frightened as he was, he never sunk so low as to pray.
One day, an English shell exploded too close to us. Killed my sergeant and wounded me. My war was over. Back home, I found a very different Oxford from the one I'd known before. In the cold, hard, godless world which followed the war to end all wars, logic was king, and faith was rarely seen, or if it was laughed out of court. Freud was all the rage. According to him, religion was a neurosis. I joined the crowd. No more fantasy for me, no more wishful thinking. A strict diet of Plato, Homer, Cicero, Virgil, Macrobius, Euripides, Herodotus, Persius. I threw myself into my new studies. But the war had made one final change that was to affect my life for years to come.
War does many things to people, and C.S. Lewis got to know a young guy called Paddy Moore. They became great friends, and they made the kind of pledge to one another that people only make in extreme conditions like war, which was that if either of them got killed, that they would take care of the surviving relative that each of them had. Paddy was killed, And when Jack came back from the war, he felt it was an absolute duty, honour bound, to take care of Paddy's mother.
Thank you.
Anything else I can get you?
Mother? Mother, I can't find my new piece of music.
In a moment, Maureen.
Mother, I need it now.
In a moment, Maureen.
Mrs. Moore was very kind. First time I met her, I liked her immensely. She came to mean a great deal to me.
I think he wanted a mother, and Mrs. Moore could be a mother. I think he wanted a home. She would provide one. I think he wanted a family again, and there was one ready-made for him.
I did not discuss Mrs. Moore with my father. I did not discuss her with my friends. I'm certainly not going to discuss her with you.
He led this kind of strange life. I mean, almost a life of drudgery, really. He was running errands for her. He was getting things from the shops that she'd forgotten. He endured, I think, probably more than most men would. Probably more than most people would, because she was a very, very demanding woman.
Oh, there you are. There's lots of washing up to be done.
Domestic drudgery is excellent as an alternative to idleness or hateful thoughts.
Come on, lots of it.
Oh, just here.
As an alternative to the work one is longing to do and is able to do, it is maddening.
Lewis was as good as another servant. But overarching it all, of course, are his studies. Now, fortunately, he had this astonishingly brilliant mind. Anything he read stuck, and so there was no question of his understanding things. He's one of the few people in the century to have won a triple first at Oxford in mods and greats in English literature. Now, most people would have to be monastic to achieve that kind of thing. Lewis achieves it in the midst of this hodgepodge of emotions and demands and household drudgery. Clearly, some higher power was at work that got him through this. You know, Lewis, in my view, is the providential man.
He becomes eventually a tutor at Magdalen College, and then he starts falling in with a group of people who, though he couldn't have realised it at the time, were destined to change his life, and in fact, I think the lives of everybody who's ever read anything that C.S. Lewis has ever written.
First, the books I was reading turned against me. What I mean is, the ones I really liked all had this one thing in common. They were written by Christians. Very alarming. And then there were my friends. Most of them turned out to be Christians too. Even worse. In fact, Christians seem to pop up on every side. Really, a young atheist cannot guard his faith too carefully.
He didn't admire the Christians. And the thing that wrecked all that for him was that he met these incandescent minds there at Oxford who were card-carrying Christian believers.
They included people who are as famous as C.S. Lewis, notably, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien, the creator of The Lord of the Rings. Now, this group of people were as challenging in their way as W.T. Kirkpatrick had been. They were people who questioned, who argued, who debated.
A god comes down to Earth, he's killed, and is reborn. It's a universal myth. It happens everywhere.
Exactly. And it moves you.
Yes, but it's still a myth.
What if it really happened? Just once, 2,000 years ago.
Well,
A true myth, working on you in the same way as the others, but with one difference. It really happened.
What Tolkien showed me was this. The pagan stories are God speaking to us through the minds of poets. The story of Christ is God speaking to us through real events in the real world. God comes to earth, is sacrificed, then comes back to life. If you think about it, I had the whole story of Aslan and Narnia right there. And my good friend Tolkien was the one who planted the seed. One day, in the most normal of circumstances, I found myself, without warning, overwhelmed by the spine-tingling elation which I'd not felt since early childhood. It was, at all times, quite wonderful. I sincerely wished it weren't. I was in an unholy muddle. Where could I turn? Was there no escape? It was a hunt, and I was the prey.
I don't want to be caught by the Hound of Heaven. I don't want to be caught by this. I want to call my own shots. And if he catches me, he's going to have me. And I don't want that.
Some people talk quite cheerfully about man's search for God. Well, as far as I was concerned, you might as well talk about the mouse's search for the cat. Nothing in the least cheerful about it. I began to feel like a man of snow starting to melt. Drip, drip, drip. And then, trickle, trickle. I rather disliked the feeling. I had no eager desire to become a Christian, none whatsoever. But I couldn't deny the truth of what I was discovering. That God was indeed God, whether I wanted him to be or not. You must picture me alone in my room, night after night, feeling the steady, unrelenting approach of him whom I so earnestly desired not to meet. At Oxford, in the spring term of 1929, at the age of 30, I finally gave in and admitted that God was God. Perhaps that night I was the most dejected and reluctant convert in all England. But that moment changed my life. It was like diving. Nothing is simpler. You don't need to do anything. Just let yourself go. Total surrender. And the absolute leap in the dark is demanded. So what do? You close your eyes and
by the 1930s, C.S. Lewis is an established Oxford figure. He's a man who is assured, set in his ways already. He's a man who has academic standing. He's written academic books. He's respected by his peers, certainly respected and admired by his students. And he has a strong Christian faith.
Right, who's first out of the stocks?
Not for me.
Barfield, how about you?
Oh, not today if you don't mind.
Oh, not today. Anybody got any? Tolkien, how about you?
Well, I have actually been working on my manuscript.
Oh, what a surprise! We called ourselves the Inklings.
Well, two interesting new characters coming through.
Oh, no, Chollas, not another bloody elf.
My great friend J.R.R. Tolkien was always there. And my brother Warney, now back from the army, often joined us as well.
Dark is the morning that awaits us, said Aragorn. Darker even than the dream ceremony.
Here were birthed some of the great stories of the 20th century, stories which are now regarded as being the great myths and legends of our time. They came out of the process of being told, read aloud, part of the oral tradition which all these men understood the importance of. Storytelling. Essentially, it was storytelling, not story writing.
Even before he set foot on its jagged slope.
We have a problem.
What sort of problem?
Geographical.
Geographical.
The reader doesn't know where he is.
Quite right.
Need a map.
A map! A map! A map!
We talked, we argued, we read our latest work in progress to each other, and we laughed. Oh, how we laughed. What better sound than the laughter of good friends?
By the late 30s, Lewis already has quite an academic and scholarly reputation. He's given a sermon or two, and he's invited to write a book called The Problem of Pain. Lewis, at this point, very consciously and deliberately at that stage of his life, decides to lend himself to being an expositor of the faith.
I suppose I was becoming known as a defender of the faith, often explaining Christianity in my books. My brother Warney and I moved into the Kilns, a little cottage just outside Oxford. It was here that I would someday write The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
Go on, Jack.
All in all, I was perfectly happy. But as I should have learned from my childhood, if things are too perfect, they cannot last. The world turns, darkness gathers, and for the second time in my life, Britain found itself at war with Germany. And then came the real invasion.
Here we go, Jack. Let's see.
Brace yourself, Warnie. Are you for Lewis?
Yes, sir.
Come on then, out you go. That's it. 4 of you, yes? When Hitler's bombers made life in our cities too dangerous, the children of Britain were evacuated to families in the countryside. Our little household became one of those homes of refuge.
It's hard to imagine what 2 crusty old bachelors would have thought when a bunch of evacuated children from London turned up on their doorstep in the war, and it's hard to imagine how they could have easily adjusted to it. And it must have been a nightmare for the children as well, one would have thought.
Well, welcome to the kilns. Now, I don't want you to be worried. Anything you want, just ask Warnie or me. Right, Warnie?
Absolutely.
Treat this place as if it were your own home.
Really?
Of course.
All right then.
All in all, our young guests seemed nice enough creatures. Warnie and I tried to keep them busy. But they soon got bored and came asking,
What do we do now? Yeah.
anything you want.
Let's play hide and seek. Let's go. Come on.
No, not in here, not in here. Out you go. That's it, good children, that's it. Whatever we suggested was somehow never quite enough. There was no getting round it. Our house was occupied territory.
I'm ready. Where are you?
Please,
Come out, wherever you are.
quiet!
Excuse me.
Not in here.
Mr. Lewis?
No, out.
Where are you?
Warnie, I'm going out. Clearly, something had to be done.
Everything all right, Jack?
At this time, a fairy tale for children was exactly what I knew I must write, or burst in the attempt. This is a story about 4 children. Their names were Peter, Susan, Lucy, and Edmund. They all had to go away from London suddenly because of the air raids. They went to stay at the home of an old professor who lived all by himself in the heart of the country.
Hey, what about Warnie?
Quite right.
The very first night after they arrived, all the children gathered in the boys' room. They were supposed to be asleep, but of course that was impossible, and talked about their new home. And so was born The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Reactions were mixed.
Tolkien did not like the Chronicles of Narnia because Tolkien did not like allegory. And he thought that things in Narnia too clearly stood for other things. For example, Aslan rising from the stone table is too clearly an emblem of the resurrection.
No, Jack, it really won't do.
What?
Santa Claus and a talking lion in the same book?
Tolkien's work is a huge private mythology, the whole cosmic struggle as he sees it. Whereas my Narnia tales are what I like to call a supposal.
A what?
A supposal. Suppose Christ came into an imaginary world in the form of an animal. Suppose he was sacrificed. Then suppose he came to life again. Do you see? Dear old Tollers. He's a very great man and my best and most valued friend.
We have from 1939 to the late 40s this great period of flourishing in Lewis. He's publishing scholarly work, but out come The Great Divorce and then the Screw Tape Letters, which was just a hit that no one could have anticipated. This gets him on the cover of Time magazine in America in 1947. Of course, it also gets him a lot of mail, which becomes a great burden for Lewis to discharge.
Dear Mr. Lewis, my name is Joy Gresham. I live in New York State, and it was thanks to you that I became a Christian. I'm enclosing some of my work, so you won't write me off as a nut. My poetry has received 1 or 2 national awards. Here's one I think you'll like. I wrote it during the Civil War in Spain. It's called Snow in Madrid. Softly, so casually, lovely, so light, so light. The cruel sky lets fall something one does not fight. Men before perishing see with unwounded eye, for once a gentle thing fall from the sky.
It was her intelligence and passion that captured my attention. Her mind was lithe and quick and muscular as a leopard. Her journey to faith one of courage and sublime honesty. She said she was coming to England soon and would like to meet me. Would I agree? I agreed. It was that simple.
Yeah. Do you know what she looks like?
No. Look for someone American.
Right.
Mr. Lewis?
Oh.
Hi. I'm Joy Gresham.
Oh, what's your honor?
See, I told you it was him. This is Douglas.
Hello, Douglas.
And this is David.
Hello,
Hi.
David. Yeah. Oh, this is Wally.
Hi, how do you do?
Cup of tea?
At first, I didn't know what to think. Separated from her husband, she was soon to be divorced. She'd been brought up as a Jew, took up communism, tried as hard as she could to make it fit, couldn't, and finally became a Christian. Her conversion, a story of blessed defeat.
Ask them about the beavers.
Ask him. But what?
How they get the food for the children. I'll let you ask him. And why don't you? Shut up.
Thank you. Jack, the boys have a question about Narnia. They're too shy to ask, so I will. The White Witch makes it always winter in Narnia, right?
Correct.
So nothing grows?
No, nothing at all.
And she doesn't allow fruits or vegetables to be imported?
Absolutely not. No.
So where do the beavers get all the stuff for that great dinner they serve up to the kids?
Oh, that's easy. The beavers fish through a hole in the ice.
Oh, they do. They fish for oranges and milk and
Yeah.
potatoes. How can you fish for potatoes?
Well, I suggest a further reading of the text.
Aha! You're totally flummoxed. Admit it.
Well,
Well, I dare say, the land of the White Witch, you could expect to find a thriving black market.
Joy Davidman, now that I look back, was a beautiful, troubled soul, looking for something desperately, whether communism or Dianetics or religion. She found what she was looking for in C.S. Lewis. It is that beautiful and that simple.
Did Joy go to England originally to catch C.S. Lewis? Well, I've asked a number of women this question, and almost universally the answer is, Of course she went to England to catch C.S. Lewis.
But to meet spiritually and emotionally and intellectually was something very rare for two people from opposite poles. Totally opposite. A Jewish divorcee with two sons and the great C.S. Lewis. But they did meet on all levels.
Would you repeat after me? I do solemnly declare
I do solemnly declare
that I know not
that I know not
of any...
I think it was in 1953 or 54 that for some reason the British Home Office decided not to renew my mother's visa to stay in England. So suddenly she was faced with the, to her, horrible idea of going back to America. She unburdened her soul to Jack and Warnie about this, and I think possibly Jack might have suddenly realized he really didn't want this friend to disappear out of his life. So he thought, well, you know, this is just something I can do that will give my friend a chance to remain in England as a British subject. So they arranged this registry office marriage.
Is there a ring? Very well, no ring.
So they married at a registry office. In Lewis's mind, as far as we know from what he said at the time, this was strictly a paper marriage. A ruse, a device to keep her in England.
I hereby pronounce you man and wife.
A paper wedding. What a strange phrase. But that, I suppose, is what it was. Certainly not a real bond of love sanctified before Almighty God. I thought of it then as a mere arrangement, nothing more.
She went on living in her own house at 10 Old High Street down in Headington, and no more was said. That was the end of it. But then, of course, a short while later, my mother started complaining of pains in her legs, and everyone diagnosed as rheumatism and arthritis and all the usual things. But it didn't get any better, it just progressively got worse. And then there came that cataclysmic day when she tripped and fell in the hall of 10 Old High Street, and her leg snapped like a twig.
She's struck down with cancer. She's diagnosed as dying of cancer. This is the end. There is no hope. And at that point, and only then, when she can pursue no more, when all her pieces have been wiped off the board, it's Lewis that makes the move.
They say a rival often turns a friend into a lover. And as rivals go, approaching death is most efficient. I had to tell you I love you. May I kiss you?
Sure, you can kiss me. Thank you.
All pretense fell away.
Oh, I'm happy.
I knew then that I loved her.
Thank you.
Loved her with every particle of my being. And that I must marry her in the eyes of God. Dear Father Bide, a gentle and genuine man of God. He was extremely concerned about Joy's condition. All the more so, since he quietly felt he'd been given the gift of healing.
Almighty God, the fountain...
I was cautious at first, but he came to the hospital to lay hands on Joy.
We beseech thee to have compassion upon our infirmities, and those things which for our unworthiness we dare not.
Almost as an afterthought, we asked if he would marry us. He agreed on the spot, and gave us the sacrament. We became a true man and wife before God and the world and two watching nurses.
With this ring I thee wed.
With this ring I thee wed.
With my body I thee honour.
With my body I thee honour.
And all my worldly goods with thee I share.
And all my worldly goods with thee I share.
In the name of the Father.
In the name of the Father.
And of the Son.
And of the Son.
And of the Holy Ghost.
And of the Holy Ghost.
Amen.
Amen. In the days that followed, new beauty and new tragedy entered my life together hand in hand. My heart was breaking, though I knew that I'd never been so happy before. And then, the miracle.
How's that?
Her condition improved. Doctors couldn't explain it. There was little pain, and her strength increased.
Her hip grows back, for goodness sakes. I mean, the x-rays show that where there wasn't bone, there's now bone. She's out of the bed, she's bouncing around very healthily, they have this honeymoon. You know, Lewis enjoys a married life with a family.
It was like watching someone come back to life, I suppose, in a way. The experience they went through must have been like having your greatest dream come true when you least expect it to. They both returned to a richer life than either of them had ever had before, because they could glory in each other's company.
And so I dwindled into a husband. I never expected in my 60s to be afforded the happiness I was denied in my 20s. What was joy not to me? She was my daughter, and my mother, my pupil, my teacher, my subject, my sovereign, my mistress, my lover, and always my trusty comrade, friend, fellow soldier. We feasted on love.
She said, Belle, now I know that the movies and the poets are right. It exists. She meant love, of course.
I should have known. Should have expected. It was all too perfect to last. An X-ray, the first we approached without dread, revealed that the cancer was awake again. It's like being recaptured by the giant when you've passed through every gate and are almost out of sight of his castle.
For Lewis, the very real challenge to his mind and his faith of what had just happened. Why had that happened? You know, that God had answered his prayer. What was God doing now? Giving him back a little bit of comfort, and only to take it away now that it was all the more poignant.
We were awakened by her screaming. We took her to the hospital. She spent the day in very little pain, thanks to drugs. Conscious for the most part, and never a word. Not one single word of complaint. My love, when it's my time, will you come to me? If it's allowed?
Allowed? Who could stop me? Heaven can't hold me. And as for hell, I'd blow it up. You have made me so happy.
I believe you. You've made me love you.
Mrs. Lewis?
I'm at peace with God.
I'm at peace with God, she said to the chaplain. And then she smiled. She smiled. Not at me.
All those that believe in thee.
For 30 years, my faith was my temple. Now I feared that my temple was little more than a house of cards.
I don't believe there's any question that his faith was shaken to its roots. When his mother died, there's C.S. Lewis and his brother Warnie, and their father remote, locked off from them, unable to express his grief and share in their grief. And now, 50-something years later, Joy dies, and here it is, the same story all over again. Now, you would think, wouldn't you? You would think that they would remember, that they would be able to put themselves back into the position of those two little boys who've lost their mother and can't reach their father, and they would know the secret to be able to deal with the children that are now in their care. But of course they can't.
No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I found it hard to take in what anyone said. I was aware of being an embarrassment to everyone I met. I couldn't talk to the children. The moment I tried, there appeared this look as if I were committing an indecency. I was trapped. I was frozen. Like my own Narnia people caught by the White Witch's spell in perpetual winter. But this time, no Aslan to leap to the rescue. I had built a house of faith. And now, it had collapsed at one blow. The play of a child, a talking lion, a god who heard prayers. Oh, my faith? All fairy tales. She died. She was dead. Was the word so difficult to learn? Nothingness?
It's all a farce.
Where is God when you really need him? Go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain. What do you find? A door slammed in your face, with the sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. And after that, silence.
Jack never lost his faith in the existence of God. He started to be tempted to doubt the nature of God, and he overcame that. But to expect a man to come through the realization of his grief and to be happy? I'm not happy about it now, and it's, 50 years later. The grief of my mother's death still hurts.
I was afraid to go to places where Joy and I had been together. I had a ghastly sense of unreality. What was wrong with the world? Why did it seem so flat, shabby, worn out? Joy was gone. Her absence was like the sky, spread over everything. Oh, what an awful time. You know, looking back, I see that I was too wrapped up in my memory of Joy. I'd yet to learn that passionate grief does not link us with the dead. It cuts us off from them. You can't see clearly when your eyes are blinded with tears. But there comes a time when, I don't know, you do start to see again.
I think that the grief one experiences as a little boy when you lose your mother is very, very different from the grief you experience when you've lost the one woman you've loved in your entire life. He could understand what was happening to him and realize that you do get through it. Life does go on whether you like it or not. But it doesn't mean you're going to be happy about it. I walked into the common room and Jack was standing with his left hand resting on the mantelpiece. He turned around as I came and looked at me. And he seemed to have aged 20 years in that week since I'd last seen him. And I lost it. I burst into tears and I said, "Oh, Jack," and just completely broke up. And when he put his arms around me. And we just held on to each other for a few minutes, both of us crying. And finally, I got myself a little bit more under control, and I said, what are we going to do now? And Jack said,
"We carry on."
And that's what we set out to do.
The whole thing was, I had to learn to let go and not care whether I met Joy again. So I asked God, is this the only way I can return to you? By letting go of her? And do you know what the answer was? Nothing. Well, rather not quite nothing. Like a silent, rather compassionate gaze. Peace, child. You don't understand. I always thought I could understand whatever I put my mind to. But God knows better. He forced me to admit that the best is perhaps what we understand least. Not my idea of God, but God himself. Why not? Aren't we all his little children? Goodness. Look at the time. Getting late. You really do get stronger, you know. Like Aslan the lion. Aslan allowed himself to be sacrificed. They cut off his mane. But then it grew back. And in the end, he was stronger than ever. Mind you, I like to think that if you ever looked closely, you could always see the scars. Always. There you are, you see? Snow. I told you so. The snow of Narnia. Do you remember the very last book in the Narnia Chronicles? The last battle? Do you remember those very last words? It was only the beginning of the real story, the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. I can't wait.